Let's talk some chess. It's not very common for a top player to play a gambit against another top player, especially in today's game, but Bobby Fischer was not scared of such things. This game was played in 1963 in New York, New York. He's playing Reuben Fine, who was a very accomplished chess player himself, and also a university professor, which I just looked up before this. And Bobby goes for a gambit, which we'll see just in a couple of moves. So we have e4 by Bobby, e5 by Reuben, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to c4. Very normal opening stuff. But now Reuben plays bishop to c5, inviting the Evans Gambit, which is exactly what Bobby plays. So the Evans Gambit kind of looks a little bit silly. It's b4. It obviously attacks the bishop, but you're just sacrificing this pawn. This pawn is not defended by any other pieces, and black here can take the pawn safely, which is exactly what Reuben does. But now you have the main idea behind the Evans Gambit, which is c3, kicking the bishop away, and after the bishop retreats to a5, you push d4. And now you have this nice sort of strong pawn center. These pieces are quite active. Your dark squared bishop has an open path to development. The knight can get into the game. The king can castle. So a lot of ideas from here, but of course you have given up a pawn. And your pawn on c3 is pinned, which is why I don't really like to play the Evans Gambit all that much. And Bobby maybe didn't like that either because after Fine takes the pawn on d4, Bobby immediately castles kingside, breaking this pin and just getting the king to safety. And king safety will be a very important theme in this game, as we see. So here, Fine can't really resist. He takes the pawn on c3, so now he's up 2 pawns, or 3 pawns. I lost count. Let's do a quick count. Yeah, he's up 3 pawns, so he's up a ton of material. Did I count that right? Yeah. He's up 3 pawns, so a ton of material. He has this nice passed pawn on c3. It's protected by the bishop. And now we're going to see if Bobby can take advantage of all this open space that he's created on the queen side and get his pieces out into attacking formation. So Bobby plays queen to b3, which is actually the main move in this line after pawn captures on d4, is putting the queen on b3. Again, Bobby preferred to get his king safe first and now plays queen to b3. And the threat is quite obvious. The queen and the bishop are lining up on f7, and you don't want this to come with check because then the position will just totally fall apart. So the proper way to defend here is by putting the queen on f6, defending this f7 pawn, but also defending the passed c3 pawn. And you need to defend this pawn because it's attacked twice by the knight and the queen, and it's only defended once right now by the bishop. So adding the queen to f6 will add a second defender and make sure that pawn can't be captured. Unfortunately for Fine, he played the queen to e7 move. Maybe he wants to keep this f6 square open for his knight. Maybe he just didn't really care about this passed pawn because he's up 3 pawns already. But this allows Bobby to take the pawn with the tempo, and the knight comes to c3. So this is the first mistake of the game by Fine. And now this is a better position for Bobby, but it's not that much better until Fine makes his next move, which is another mistake. This knight is threatening to move up the board, has aspirations of getting to the 5th rank and being a real nuisance, so you need to nip it in the bud and capture it while you can. So bishop takes on c3 is the correct move here, and then queen obviously takes back. But Fine says, no, I see that this knight wants to come to d5, so I'm going to stop it by developing a piece, which is a very reasonable idea and often works, but not in this case. He plays knight to f6, guarding this d5 square, but in chess, there's nothing more demoralizing than when you play a move intending to prevent your opponent from making a move, and then your opponent makes that move anyways, and that's exactly what happens here. We have knight to d5 by Bobby, even though the knight Fine's knight is guarding d5. So this is a monster knight. The knight is attacking the queen, of course. If the bishop ever moves from this diagonal, the knight is threatening to take on c7, forking the rook and the king. So you pretty much have to capture it, and that's what Fine does. Knight takes, pawn takes on d5. And now a couple of things have happened which are good for Bobby. The e-file is opened up, and the queen and the king are lined up on this e-file, so that's not good. Even though the bishop is guarding this e1 square, so you don't really have any serious ideas of rook to e1 right now, protected by the knight. We'll get into that later. But you don't want your queen and your king lined up on this open e-file, so that's one issue. The other more pressing issue is that the pawn is attacking the knight on c6. And it's not really easy to find a good square for this knight. You don't want to retreat because that's just super passive. You can't obviously move to d4 because of knight captures on d4. And this knight to b4 move looks kind of cheeky because it's protected twice by the bishop and the queen, but then you do get rook to e1 because the knight is blocking the bishop from protecting the e1 square, and here you just have to take with the queen, knight takes back, and now Bobby's just up a bunch of material. So it's not clear where to put this knight. Reuben puts it on the best spot, which is e5. but now Bobby just trades. Knight takes on e5, queen takes on e5, and now Bobby sort of can smell blood in the water because he has some very active pieces, or at least this bishop will soon be active. He has an open e-file, and Fine's king is in the center of the board. So Bobby develops his final piece. He plays bishop to b2, which is, it's a nice move for many reasons, but note that Fine is attacking Bobby's undefended rook on a1, so an important move to stop that. But really the idea here is you're developing this bishop, you're grabbing hold of this really powerful diagonal, you're attacking the queen, and you're forcing Fine to make a move that is not castling, right? Because if Fine can castle his king to safety, then he can just take advantage of his 2 extra pawns and play a boring endgame and win the game. But this forces the king to stay in the center of the board because the queen has to move instead of the king. And here we have queen to g5 by Fine. And the idea behind this queen to g5 move is that it's staying in protection of the g7 pawn. You really don't want bishop takes on g7 because then the king will never castle and a powerful attack will be coming and things just won't work out. So that's why the queen is on g5. So now Bobby's next move, I think, is like the meanest but also coolest move of the game. It's not the move that the engine recommends, but it does work. So take a second and see if you can find like the stylistically coolest move that Bobby can play in this position. Okay, so I said it wasn't necessarily the best move, but it definitely has the most style points, and it works, so that probably makes it the best move. Bobby plays the merciless h4. So we saw a pawn sacrifice on c3 with the Evans Gambit to start, and now this is just another, you're attacking the queen, but obviously the pawn is undefended, so Fine here just says, whatever, I'll accept the sacrifice. But now the queen has abandoned the defense of g7. It didn't really have many choices. There weren't any squares along, there weren't many squares. I guess you can move the queen to e6, but then you can just get bishop to d4 or d3, so that doesn't really work. Anyways, there's not many squares where the queen can defend g7 from, so Fine just sort of takes his medicine and captures the pawn and hopes for some counterplay, but now you get bishop takes on g7, and now the position has totally fallen apart for Reuben Fine. The king cannot castle. King side, it's going to be hard to castle queen side because you need 2 moves to get this bishop out, and now the king is stuck in the center of the board. Rook to e1, either rook to e1 looks very good, checking the king, and the king cannot run to the king side because the bishop is guarding f8. So this is just a super, super dangerous position. Fine starts with rook to g8, and now, maybe there's a chance for counterplay. The bishop is undefended. Maybe the queen and the rook can team up and, checkmate Bobby's king. But Bobby just clamps the door shut right away with rook f to e1, which also creates some space for his king, although it obviously won't be needed. So this is a really powerful check. The king has 1 square to move to, and that's d8, and you can only block with the queen, which is no good, so of course king to d8 is played. But now Bobby finishes the game with great style, and I think this was the move that really made this game like a memorable game in the database. So see if you can find Bobby's final move while I give you a moment. Okay, so here it is. We saw this kind of idea before about wanting to get this queen away from a defensive square, and the move here is queen to g3. And this just looks like a crazy sacrifice. I mean, it doesn't look like, I'm looking at something else. It doesn't look like a crazy sacrifice, but it does look a little bit strange that Bobby wants to trade queens, because if you just sort of see this as a queen trade, you get queen takes queen, pawn takes, and then rook takes bishop. And not only that, but the bishop is eyeing the rook here on e1, and which I should mention. Sorry, I'm like all over the place. Bobby plays this e1 move. You can take with the bishop, but it doesn't really help because then rook takes bishop, and we have the same exact position. So wanted to address that. But anyways, after queen to g3, this looks a little bit weird because after queen takes, pawn takes, rook takes, this is just better for Fine, or even I guess bishop takes here. Rook takes, that's better. But of course that's not Bobby's plan. Bobby's plan, if the queen sacrifice is accepted, is not to take back with the pawn. It's to put the bishop on f6, and this would be checkmate. The rook is slicing this way, the bishop is checking the king, and the king just has nowhere else to go, and there's no way to block this, and the game is over. And that's the whole idea behind putting the queen on g3, is you are trying to prevent the the black queen from defending this f6 square. So right now, if the bishop makes it to f6, undefended or unattacked, then that's checkmate. So the black queen is desperately trying to stay in defense. But now that the white queen is on g3, that just cannot happen. All of these squares which defend f6 are taken away by either the queen or the bishop. So anything that you do is just a straight up queen sacrifice. And in this position, Reuben Fine resigned the game. The best move here is to put the queen on e7. This actually does lead to checkmate eventually, but in a little bit, later combinations. So you get rook takes, king takes, and then queen to e5 check, and all these squares are taken away. The king is being beaten back to the 8th rank, and checkmate will follow soon. I actually think this is, you get the same idea of a checkmate with bishop to f6 and the queen cutting off the e file. So it was checkmate anyways, and Fine resigned in this position to give this sort of a funny final picture of Bobby trying to give away the queen, or at least trying to trade the queen on g3. So an awesome game. You don't see many games like this with the Evans Gambit, but certainly a fun one. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Drop a like, drop a subscribe. Let me know of other games you want to see me review, and we'll talk to you next time.